Hello again, this is your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheatley, back for another episode of the History of Comic Books podcast, this time with part 2 of the History of Kitchen Sink Press. When we last left off, Kitchen Sink was seeing a release of new talent with the Omaha the Cat Dancer, while Robert Crumb continued to work with the Short Hairs of America. And Kitchen Sink was also working with, of course, Will Eisner, as the company produced their first hardback book, the Will Eisner Color Treasury and the Spirit Color Album, as part of a consortium with a Danish publisher. This first book featured new and old work from Eisner, including covers and 2 new Spirit stories, with Cat Ironwood providing the running text. The color album featured reprinted stories colored by the Danish company, with Kitchen Sink holding the English-language rights to the venture. In celebration of Spirit magazine reaching number 30, it was made a jam comic with 50 different artists from Harvey Kurtzman to Frank Miller contributing. Its issues number 27 to 32 also included Shop Talk, Eisner's news segment where he interviewed fellow creators, beginning with the first being Harvey Kurtzman. Eisner would later feature Jack Kirby and Milton Caniff, among others. Dope number 4 was produced in 1981, but with a new twist in that the stories demonstrated the downside of drugs. Power Pack number 2, Mod by Bob Burden, and Snarf number 9, along with Gay Comics number 2, were also published. However, Leonard Riffis would leave Kitchen Sink for Edu Comics, his own comic line, to concentrate on school. With Dennis Kitchen now firmly settled in his new residence office in Princeton, Wisconsin, he set out modernizing the company logos for the comics and the magazines, with Leslie Cartridge doing the designs. They would be the logos that would be carried by Kitchen Sink to the end. In 1982, The Art of Will Eisner was released by Cat Ironwood, which was a comprehensive history of Eisner's career featuring high school drawings and early comic book panels. The book was extremely well received, with both the signed hardcover edition and softcover selling out. A second volume of the Spirit Color Album was also produced, and there were 6 issues of Spirit magazine. Will Eisner also quickly became a cornerstone of the company. Another legendary comics figure also joining the Kitchen Sink Press when the company began to reproduce reprints of Steve Canyon by Milton Caniff, the famed Soldier of Fortune comic strip. This came about with the prodding of Pete Pawlowski and Shel Dorf, Caniff's letterer, with the first 2 issues reprinting the 1947-1948 strips, which detailed Steve Canyon's origins of a World War II pilot and starts his own company to adventure around the world. While Kitchen wasn't a fan of Caniff's politics, he recognized Caniff as a talented artist, particularly his mastery of the comic strip form, along with being a chief influencer of the arts of the likes of Jack Kirby and John Romita Sr. Bizarre Sex number 10 and Gay Comics number 3 were also produced that year, along with Bop, a foiled magazine that attempted to meld rock and roll with comics by Cat Ironwood. Ironwood tried to mix text and cartoon pieces in the comic, with the experiment ultimately failing as it only lasted 1 issue. Fandom Confidential was also released, which satirized the comic book business with reprints of Fumiti, photographs with word balloons inserted into the speech. Jim Ingle and Chuck Fila produced it, but while sometimes funny, most of the humor was lost on readers as all the jokes were mostly in-house. Finally, Kitchen decided to sell Krupp to Capital City Distribution as he wanted to focus just on publishing. With the deal finalized in 1983, Krupp was removed from the comics, and the corporation's name was now formally changed to Kitchen Sink Press Incorporated. In 1983, Outer Space Spirit, the Spirit Color Album Volume 3, and Signal from Space, a collection of Will Eisner's Life on Another Planet, with colorization by Andrew LeBlanc and Eisner himself, was released. The Spirit magazine ended with issue number 41 and replaced with Will Eisner's Quarterly, which featured the first appearance of Will Eisner's story A Life Force about a Bach's tenement in the 1930s. Kitchen Sink tried reprinting the Spirit in color but failed, something Eisner could have told them, as he always intended the stories to be depicted in black and white, similar to how black and white movies are horribly colorized today. They did start up the Kitchen Sink Pipeline, a bi-monthly newsletter in response to the new direct market. Originally, Kitchen Sink would produce their books first and then told retailers they were available. With the new direct market, though, books had to be advertised 3 months in advance, with covers produced and prices set, which the new newsletter was for, so the retailers could order them. Funny Judge, a collection of old political cartoons from the Milwaukee Journal by Bill Sanders and columns by Dennis Gale, was released, featuring Chris Seraphin and an Orthodox judge. However, the book sold so poorly, it was used to insulate the barn in Princeton. Gay Comics number 4 also came out, not only being one of the Kitchen Sink's last black and white comics, but also addressed the issue of AIDS in the 6-page story Safe Sex, the first time comic books ever addressed the subject. In 1984, a collection of Good Man Beaver, the strip that Harvey Kurtzman and Will Elder was created originally in Help magazine in the 1960s, was produced about a naive young man adrift in the wicked world, and was collected in a single book and released by Kitchen Sink Press. It was notable because of one story, Good Man Goes Playboy, used the characters from Archie comics for parody purposes. Archie wasn't happy about it and sued twice in the 1960s, and their tune hadn't changed since. Nevertheless, the collection did well enough to encourage the company to begin pursuing other collections of Kirkman's work. The biggest success of that year for Kitchen Sink, though, came from Megaton Man by then unknown 22-year-old Don Simpson. Simpson originally submitted some sample pages to Kitchen, who loved them so much he immediately contacted Simpson for a series. Soon, Don Simpson would move to Princeton the next year, producing Megaton Man on a bi-monthly basis in full color. As satire of the Silver Age of superheroes, it quickly became a success. The color comics also contained The Spirits, number 4 to 7, and Hitler's Cocaine. While these comics weren't as successful, they were kept going thanks to Megaton Man, since it was cheaper to print multiple color comics over just one. Gay Comics number 5 was also put out, which would be the last issue of the series at Kitchen before being sold to a publisher that specialized in the gay marketplace. In 1985, Megaton Man continued with issues number 4 through 7, though Marvel would sue over issue number 4 in the Buttons produced, one in which had Megaton Man proclaiming, "Are you kidding? I eat the X-Men for breakfast," as characters like the Wall Man, a satire of Spider-Man, was too close to the original characters. However, Simpson was already becoming worried about being cast as the Megaton Man creator, so he started Border Worlds, a science fiction feature, as a backup story in issue number 6. Death Rattle Volume 2 number 1 was released as a new horror anthology series, but also a venue for new and established artists, one of which was Mark Schultz, who would later produce one of Kitchen Sink's most successful comic books, but more on that later. Will Eisner's A Life Force was collected into a book and brought about higher sales than when it was a feature in Will Eisner Quarterly, which was failing. As a result, Sunset in the Sunshine City, which appeared in Will Eisner Quarterly number 6, would be overlooked, though today is considered a lost gem by the master of comic books. The Spirit continued comic returned to black and white with issue number 11, and stayed that way until the series ended. A new column was also produced to be replaced by Kat Ironwoods in that issue, as she had since left Kitchen Sink to work as the editor at Eclipse Comics. Kitchen Sink also republished Will Eisner's A Contact with God in both hardcover and softcover editions, becoming an instant bestseller along with Will Eisner's New York. By 1986, the company structure of Kitchen Sink Press Incorporated has solidified, with Dennis Kitchen basically in charge and being able to overrule anything, but still with enormous consensus with Pete Pulaski and Dave Schreiner. That Omaha the Cat Dancer was by Reed Waller and Kate Worley was acquired, having first published the first issue before Waller and Worley had published the second through Steel Dragon Press. Kitchen reached a new deal with them, where the first 2 issues were reprinted under Kitchen Sink, with the rest of the series continuing under the imprint as well with number 3 onward. The series was an instant success and much needed, as Megaton Man ended with issue number 10, while Don Simpson took his backup feature, Border Worlds, about a doomed space station on a collision course with a planet, into a black and white series. However, it didn't have the impact of Megaton Man. Meanwhile, Death Rattle continued in black and white with issue number 5. Issue number 8 was significant, though, as it featured the first story of Xenozoic by Mark Schultz, whose art invoked Wally Wood, though sometimes a bit too much. However, the story was so popular with editors at Kitchen Sink and readers that they planned Zoozoic Tales series was planned for the next year. Kitchen Sink was also released Alien Fire by writer Anthony F. Smith and writer-artist Eric Vincent, a high-concept science fiction series about a group of travelers searching a scorched earth for goods and selling them to other alien races. The series was favorably received by critics, but its highbrow content would ultimately doom it by the next year. Will Eisner Quarterly, meanwhile, concluded with its 9th issue due to poor sales. Kitchen Sink did start reprints of Eisner's old Hawks of the Sea pilot strips from the 1930s, thanks to Spanish proofs being provided by Al Williamson, which Kitchen Sink Press was able to translate into English. On the new front, Will Eisner produced The Dreamer Story, a semi-fictionalized account of the birth of comic books and the personalities who formed them. Recounting classic tales such as when Jack Kirby confronted a mobster at his old studio, Eisner did get some friction from Dennis Kitchen because he felt he was being too nice to Harry Donenfeld and Jack Leibowitz, the founders of DC. However, Eisner countered he never really worked with them, so he really couldn't say how bad they really were. Perhaps the most important reprint of 1986, though, from Kitchen Sink Press, was Harvey Kurtzman's The Jungle Book, which first appeared in 1959 in a cheap paperback format by Ballantine Books. Featuring 4 stories that satirize everything from detective stories to westerns, along with being the first appearance of Goodman Beaver, it quickly garnered a cult status with fans, and Kitchen Sink Press jumped at the chance of producing a prestige edition. Pete Pawlowski reconstructed and colored the cover, Art Spiegelman gave a hand-lettered introduction, and Kurtzman even provided commentary. When the deluxe hardcover was released, it wasn't an instant bestseller, but garnered strong word of mouth, and a softcover edition was released later due to its success. To date, it remains one of the favorite books the Kitchen Sink staff ever produced. However, another important event that year emerged with the foundation of the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, originally founded to defend Michael Correa, the owner of Friendly Frank's, a comic book store, who became a target of a legal action of carrying books like Kitchen Sink Press, Home of the Holiday Dancer, and The Bizarre Sex, along with the riskier content from their publishers. Free speech attorney defended Correa, and it ultimately had the conviction overturned thanks to funds raised by Kitchen Sink Press and various other comic book artists. By 1990, Dennis Kitchen had the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund fully incorporated into a nonprofit that provided legal defenses in similar cases. It remains an important free speech and protector of comic book rights to this day, and I encourage all listeners to donate to the cbldf.org. In 1987, the farm in Princeton was remodeled with art and editorial rooms added. Unfortunately, Holly Brooks left the farm in late 1986, a devastating personal blow to Dennis Kitchen. Jim Glassford had returned to the company, though, and started running the warehouse. However, a glut of new comics led to a downturn in the industry, affecting Kitchen Sink when Alien Fire ended with issue number 3 due to diminished sales. Border Worlds by Don Simpson was also ended with issue number 8, while other stalwart books like The Spirit and Snarf performed poorly. However, Zinzak Tales No. 1 by Mark Schultz and Omaha the Cat Dancer did well, resulting in the later getting the collected Omaha Value 1. As for Zenzoic Tales, which told of a world where humans and dinosaurs coexist, the sales dipped with issue number 2 and 3 before number 4 saw them pick up again, as creator Mark Schultz started refining his art, evoking both Wallywood and Frank Frazetta. Kitchen Sink Press continued reprints as well, with Mail Call, a collection of Milton Caniff's World War II strip in its entire run, including a classic pinup of the character Mace Lace, was released, as was Steve Canyon's 40th anniversary special, with Caniff recalling the origins of the character. It was sadly one of his last recollections, as the comic strip great would pass away in 1998. Well, Eisner created a short graphic novel, The Building, about 3 people with different stories about living in a tenement building. While considered one of Eisner's minor work, it still sold well. Kitchen Sink also produced a new record, a 33 1/3 RPM Spirit picture disc, with Eisner providing the cover, but it only broke even when released. It included 5 different versions of Every Little Bug, a little ditty Eisner wrote back in 1947, along with music by John Christensen. In 1988, Kitchen Sink started reprinting Al Cap's classic Little Abner's strip, of which Dennis Kitchen had been trying for years to get the rights to reprint the classic comic strip, and the Cap estate finally agreed with Kitchen detailed the money that could be brought in. Kitchen was a fan of the series, especially during the period the great Frank Frazetta did the pencils for the strip. His female characters were quite beautiful. It was an ambitious plan to reprint the entire 43-year run over 54 volumes. Kitchen Sink Press also completed negotiations with King Features to reprint the classic Flash Gordon strip of 1951, which also included art by Frank Frazetta and writing by Harvey Kurtzman. Flash Gordon was originally created by Alex Raymond back in the 1930s, and he and Milton Caniff were considered one of the 2 great innovators of the adventure comic strip. As for Caniff, his Steve Canyon was converted collections to semi-annual softcovers after his death, to great fan response. Another reprint, Betsy Baddies by Harvey Kurtzman and Sarah Downs, was released, a series of 1-page strips that first appeared in Playboy about a young woman trying to set up an apartment in the city. Other books there were Will Eisner's The Life Force, which was collected into a 1 edition, along with Omaha Volume 2. Blab, Champ's digest-size magazine, was also produced as a tribute to Mad Magazine. Kings of the Skies by James Vance and artist Dan Burr, a Depression-era miniseries about a 12-year-old boy looking for his father, was also released. An epic in scope yet personal, it followed a young Freddie Block from Detroit to California while enduring all the rail rides, labor rights, and communal living. Kitchen had met Vance a year before, who presented him with the outline for the story. Kitchen immediately loved it and hooked up with him with Dan Burr to be his artist, while other constituent press regulars such as Pop Pawlowski, Harvey Kurtzman, and Mark Schultz would provide the covers. The series was an immediate critical and commercial success. Another was Melody by Sylvia Raincourt and Jacques Vauvin, which told the true story of Raincourt's life as an exotic dancer in Montreal. Raincourt wrote the story and provided the rough layouts to Vauvin, who translated her French to English while finishing out the art. It made for a charming addition and perfect companion to Omaha. Meanwhile, despite production delays, Xenozoic Tales kept getting more and more successful. The delays were due to Mark Schultz continuing to refine his writing and art, becoming more of a perfectionist. To help out, Steve Stiles, a veteran humor cartoonist, was brought on to provide backup stories for each issue, resulting in 3 more being produced that year. Don Simpson brought Megaton Man back with the return of Megaton Man, a 3-issue miniseries that satirized the merchandising of comic book business, though Simpson's relationship with Dennis Kitchen remained stormy at best. Reportedly, Simpson didn't want to be characterized as Megaton Man creator, but Kitchen argued that's what he did best. Simpson would return to various characters in the series over the years, but ultimately to break away from Kitchen altogether. That same year, Chip and Vanilla and Dennis in the Deep by Doug Potter was released, which focused on the inhabitants of a large city. However, Twist, J.D. King's humor anthology, ended as did Death Rattle with issue number 18. On the bright side, The Spirit kept rolling with issues number 39 and 51, with Tom Hengettis, a former Comics Journal editor, taking over as new columnist, replacing Dave Schreiner. The series also won the best reprint at the Harveys, Kitchen Sink's first, of the awards. Kitchen Sink Press also started expanding its merchandising line with t-shirts and trading cards of their books, from Xenozoic Tales to The Spirit. In 1989, Kitchen Sink reached an agreement with Berkeley Books to distribute its softcover trades to general markets, such as Lil Abner and A Contract with God. However, after 2 years, the experiment failed as Berkeley proved a poor advocate for Kitchen Sink Press's books. Nancy Eats Food, collected food strips by Aaron Bushmiller, along with How Sluggo Survives, about Nancy's pal, was released that year and did quite well. Another book that was successful in the general market was Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, the most commonly known name of Mark Schultz's series, Xenozoic Tales, which collected the first 4 issues of the series. However, Secrets of San Sabah, a collection of stories originally serialized in Death Rattle, was released to poor sales. Created by Jack Jackson, it was a historical fantasy series that mixed the Spanish concepts of parts of Texas with an Indian god from outer space. Also that year, The City Pippi's Notebook by Will Eisner was released, along with Blab No. 4, Snarf, and French Ticklers, a short-lived attempt to do an English translation of a French humor comic. Kings of the Skies won the Harvey and 2 Eisners for the Best New Series and the Best Single Issue. Yarn Man and Megaton Man Meets the Unrecognizable X-Demos was also released by Don Simpson, along with Steven No. 1 and 2 by Doug Allen. Omaha, however, had only 1 issue published in 1989, with issue number 14, as Reed Waller was experiencing bad health that would later be diagnosed as bowel cancer. Kitchen Sink Press did manage to produce an Omaha statue designed by Waller and sculpted by Stephen Coase. In 1990, Pete Pulaski returned to school and became a teacher, something that 20 years later at Kitchen Sink had distracted him from. He would continue to produce the occasional work for Kitchen Sink Press, but was no longer a regular presence. John Koenig, who published the Comics Buyer's Guide and Goldmine for Cross Publishing, was hired as VP of Marketing, who introduced computerized editorials and art departments to speed up production. The farm was also remodeled and given a new warehouse, where a new retail mail-order catalog was produced, quickly becoming 15% of the company's business. Borderlands Volume 2, Number 1 by Don Simpson was released but sold poorly. Bizarre Heroes was also released by Simpson, being the first foray into superhero stories by Kitchen Sink Press, but also did badly. Finally, the Megaton Man collection, the first 4 issues, both softcover and a signed hardcover, were released. It will be Don Simpson's last work with Kitchen Sink. Will Eisner was also doing less work for The Spirit, which had reached its issue number 73, as the sales were dropping on that book as well. Omaha still sold well, with issues number 15 and 16 being released, along with a reprint of the first story from Bizarre 6 number 9, called Omaha number 0. However, the link between the issues releases did see a downturn in sales. Xenozoic Tales came out with issue number 10, which saw Mark Schultz argue even better. However, This in the Deep ended with issue number 9, as did French Ticklers with issue number 3. Snarf was even put on hiatus after issue number 15. Mark Landman began Buzz, another human anthology, while Steve in number 3 solidifies Doug Allen's place as a cult figure in the cartoonist world. Monty Beauchamp's Blab number 5 was also released this year, an all-crime issue that sold very well. Howard Cruz produced Wendell Comics, a collection of his stories about a gay couple he originally serialized in The Advocate, though it didn't sell very well. However, the World's Worst Comic Awards by John Schumacher and Rich Larson, which is a collection of the serious superhero stories over the years, did. Melody number 5 and 6 came out and sold well, but like the other Kitchen Sink Press releases, the inconsistent release schedule affected the sales. Owl Hoots, a new series by James Vance and artist Duran Garcia, was produced about an aging lawman from the first decade of the 20th century working to make a film about his exploits. It was also released, but low sales would see the series canceled after issue number 2. Vance did better when he and Dan Burns' Kingdom of the Size, which was collected the series into a 10-page story that did for Dark Horse Presents, which ended up selling well and being named one of Publishers Weekly's best trade paperbacks in 1990. On the reprint front, Secret Agent X9, the 1990s crime strip by Flash Gordon artist Alex Raymond and writer Dashiell Hammett, most popularly known as the author of The Thin Man and the Maltese Falcon, was released as collections, which sold great. Omaha was represented with the Collected Omaha Volumes 3 and 4, and Reed Waller even pulled together a miscellaneous art book, The Erratic Art of Reed Waller, which was released in a cellophane wrap to keep away from children's eyes. However, when a customer was accidentally sent a copy of The Erotic Art of Reed Waller over the art of Will Eisner, Kitchen Sink Press's phone lines burned for a while. Dinosaur Shaman, the second collection of Xenozoic Tales, was released, along with a new candy bar carrying the series' more iconic title, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. Sasha Hari, the producer of the Doors movie, was hired for merchandising Mark Schultz's creation and was able to get GM to let the use of the Cadillac name in any movie or merchandise based on the comic. At Schultz's request, he was kept as far away from negotiations as possible, with the exception of having final approval on whatever deal emerged, as he wanted to just focus on his comic book. However, Schultz was soon distracted by creating promotional art for the various products. Other works from Kitchen Sink Press was Dorman's Doogie, by Frank Stack in Halsted Street by Skip Williamson. Stack, an art professor at the University of Missouri Columbia, had helped pioneer the underground comics genre in the 1960s with Fulbert Sturgeon, with Doogie being a strip about his graphic observation of his own dog. Halsted was a collection of Williamson's strip he did for the Chicago paper back in the 1970s. Also that year, Ernie Bushmeyer's Nancy strip saw 2 more reprints in Dreams and Schemes and Burns, Bestos, and Hypos, along with Artists and Connors, a flip-side title. For the 50th anniversary of The Spirit Casebook was released, collecting 18 of the strip's best stories in both softcover and hardcover edition, along with a special Spirit Halloween mask as a novelty item. Little Abner reached its 11th book collection along with a companion book, The Fearless Fosdick, Al Cap's strip within a strip in which he satirized Chester Gould's Dick Tracy comic book strip. Mac Allen Collins, Dick Tracy's then current writer, provided the introduction. Another reprint everyone was looking forward to was Alley Oop by V.T. Hamlin, a classic and lost strip about 2 cavemen who traveled through time. Its creator, Hamlin, despite being 90 years old at the time, championed the project and even signed plates for the hardcover edition. Flash Gordon also had additional collections released, notably Flash Gordon Sunday Pages, which reprinted the full-color strips with Pete Lasky running the project and even designing the covers. The Complete Color Crazy Cat, a comic strip about a cat and mouse strange friendship, and Multicanist Terry and the Pirates, an adventure series that took place in China, was also collected, despite having been done by other publishers. This was started when Rick Marshall approached Kitchen Sink Press about reprinting the 2 books in Cliff Everett's Polly and Her Pals, about a young girl Polly and her friends' adventures in the early 20th century. Kitchen eventually agreed when they found out that both Crazy Cat and Terry were being published out of order and with poor production values, along with wanting to bring attention to the underappreciated Polly and Her Pals. Kitchen Sink also published, of all things, Batman the Dailies through DC, a collection of the earliest newspaper strips that Bob Kane had actually worked on. The series would eventually comprise of 3 books and a Sunday strip collection, with the surviving artists providing signed copies. In 1991, Heart of the Storm was published by Will Eisner, along with the Will Eisner Reader, which collected his quarterly series. The Spirit ended with issue number 87. Kitchen Sink also produced a collection of baseball comics with Will Eisner and Jules Pfeiffer, Cottonwoods, a collection of Ray Otto's baseball strip, and Small Wonders, a collection of Frank Frazier's funny animal comics, which was also released that year. From Og to Zap by Harvey Kurtzman, a signed hardcover of his history of comic books, was produced as a signed hardcover as well. The Curse of the Mellow Man by Charles Barnes was also released, a collection of his black and white comic from Raw. Kitchen Sink Press continued with other merchandise ventures such as T-shirts and cards, along with signs which were modeled after old advertisements. A notable one was a Rocketeer sign by Dave Stevens, the series creator, which was done in conjunction with the upcoming Disney movie of the same name. A pretty ambitious piece was the multicolor seriograph by Mark Schultz, who drew the art of and provided a color guide for the 11 colors that would be printed on the 11 passes on the silkscreen press. Robert Crumb did 2, while Will Eisner did 1. Xenozoic Tales, number 10, also won the Schultz the Best Artist Award at the Harveys. Kitchen Sink also produced the Grateful Dead comics for the band, despite the steep demands, which included copyrighted stories and final approval. Despite this, the 40-page magazine was well received and sold well. In 1992, Reed Waller was diagnosed with cancer, and Images of Omaha was produced to raise money for his treatment. Organized by Kate Worley and Cindy Marks, it featured contributions from the likes of Neil Gaiman and Harlan Ellison. He still managed to produce Omaha number 17, and thankfully, Waller's cancer was arrested. The Grateful Dead comics was continued with Tim Truman, who was a true Dead fan and was able to produce good stories despite the creative restraints. Invisible People, a Will Eisner book exploring the themes of forgotten people in 3 stories, also won the 2 Harveys, as did Xenozoic Tales number 12, which was released as Cadillacs and Dialects 3D book. Meanwhile, the animation company Novella signed a contract to do the cartoon Cadillacs and Dinosaurs for CBS. Blood Club by Charles Barnes was released, another edition in this Big Baby story, along with a Hey Look reprint by Harvey Kurtzman, a collection of his early comic book one-pagers, which also won a Harvey. Kitchen Sink also started collector card sets called Republicans Attack, to be timed with the upcoming presidential election. Meanwhile, talks began to merge Kitchen Sink with Tundra, the comic book company owned by Kevin Eastman, the co-creator of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. While this looked to be a boon for the company, it will eventually cause its end. In 1993, the company worked heavily with Cadillacs and Dinosaurs cartoon while it merged with Tundra on April 1st, moving the company to Massachusetts on May 15th. This proved disruptive for the company, as many of the staff couldn't due to family and financial concerns, but the deal was signed and moving forward. Cherry, an adults-only comic, was released by Larry Wells, along with Omaha number 18 and 19, making a perfect companion issue. A Century of Women Cartoonists by Trina Robbins was also released, a lavishly illustrated book that focused on 6 historical women in comics, including Trina. Time in Overdrive, another collection by Mark Schultz, was also released. A new card set was produced, Mob Wars by Max Allan Collins, which sold well. Tundra also busy, most notably with Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. His 215-page dissection of the comic book form and quickly propelled Scott McCloud to be the forefront of comic book intellectuals. From Hell by Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell, their take on the Jack the Ripper mystery, was also released to rave reviews. Cages by Dave McKean, a visually stunning graphic novel, also came out that year. Jim Blitting and Mark Martins produced Tantalizing Stories and Frank in the River, and most notably, Madman, The Oddity Odyssey by Mike Alfred was produced, which took a skewed look at the comic book superheroes. Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, meanwhile, premiered on CBS that September 18, 1993, and spawned a toy line from Tyco, along with numerous other licensing agreements, including an arcade beat-em-up game of the same name by Capcom. Sadly, while the cartoon was well received, it was ultimately canceled as it was scheduled against the then super popular Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, lasting only 13 episodes and ending on January 28, 1994. In 1994, The Crow graphic novel was released by James O'Barr with merchandise as part of the larger tie-in with the movie. The book was a huge success, selling 130,000 copies. Introducing Kafka was released by Robert Crumb and David Jan Marowitz, along with Twisted Sisters. Meanwhile, Ocean Cop Corporation bought a controlling share in Kitchen Sink Press. Sadly, the company, like many others during the speculation class, limped along, only surviving on the Crow miniseries to dwindling effect. Finally, the company was ultimately dissolved in 1999, as ultimately Kitchen Sink was no longer a unique company in the comic book industry. With the demise of the CCA, which the comics genre had originally sprang from, to the other independent publishers that are also favoring creative rights, like Image. Times had changed, and Kitchen Sink was sadly left behind. As for the company's founder, Dennis Kitchen would continue to work with Will Eisner and Harvey Kurtzman as an art agent with his new company, Dennis Kitchen Art Agency. He also became a partner with Kitchen in Linden Associates, which served as a book agency and packager for the estates of Harvey Kurtzman, Al Capp, and others. In 2010, he released The Oddly Compelling Art of Dennis Kitchen, part art book and autobiography, and in 2011 would be nominated for both an Eisner and Harvey Award. In 2013, Kitchen's work with Dark Horse continued with a new imprint, Kitchen Sink Books, with the intention of reprinting art books and collections. The first was The Best of the Comics book, a collection of stories he released with Marvel back in the 1970s, which was also released in December of 2013. As for David Schreiner, he would continue to work with Will Eisner until he passed away from cancer in 2007 at the age of 57. Even after the end of Kitchen Sink, he remained his stalwart editor, working on every one of his books with the exception of the plot. Eisner's last major work. While Kitchen Sink Press is ultimately gone, its legacy in comic books remains. For decades, it was a beacon of independent publishers and creators' rights, pushing the envelope and moving the medium in exciting new directions. Plus, with lasting legacies like the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, Kitchen Sink Press's legacy continues to be felt to this day. I would like to thank my main source for these episodes, Kitchen Sink Press, the first 25 issues by the late Dave Schreiner himself. An excellent chronicle of the history of the company with a year-by-year analysis and great full-color pictures. A must-read for anyone interested in the history of the Kitchen Sink Press.
Look, we gotta talk.
Yeah, Thunder Talk.
We're going all kinds of sideways with that sweet nerd junk.
Woke nerd junk.
It's topical.
Political.
Dare I say radical.
We've got all your latest news and reviews.
Hot music.
And a whole lot of comedy.
But it ain't for kids.
Definitely mature content.
So let's talk.
Let's talk Thunder Talk.
Thunder Talk is a proud member of the ESO Network.
And now it is May 8th, 2025, time for the favorite comic of the week. It's Jeff Week, by Kelly Thompson Guerrero and Gustavo Torrete, which is a fantastic collection of shorts featuring everyone's favorite puffy shark, Jeff, as he bounces around the Marvel Universe, teaming up with various Marvel characters from Hawkeye to Doctor Strange. Just a fun series of fun little shorts, no dialogue, just great storytelling by Guerrero and Durete's art and Kelly Thompson's writing that really makes this character really enduring. Like, he's a half puppy, half shark. He's the most adorable thing ever. Just a lot of fun. Everything that comic books can really demonstrate, because once again, there's no dialogue in this. It's just great art and storytelling put together. Easily one of the most fun books you ever read, and just a great pickup. Anyone, I would recommend this for all ages. Great read in general. And with that, we will conclude with this episode of The Archives. Join me again next week for another episode of the likely Archives editions. Still hard at work, but still taking some time on that. I'm going to make some new episodes, but we'll get there. But until then, go enjoy some good comic book, and definitely check out It's Jeff. He's a puppy shark. What more can you love?